thanks, Professor Fujisawa, for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here. Actually, I want to thank first the organizer to have gathered all these nice people to discuss during this conference the SO, transport, everything is about SO. I think it was very, very stimulating. And so I want to thank Floris, Paolo, Chris, and Goran to do that. And I will thank you because this is the last talk, and usually there is evaporation for the last talk. So thank you to be here to have for me to present the job that we are doing in Grenoble. So I will discuss with you the recent progress that we have done in the transfer of information that is stored in an electron, in a single electron, and spin information. And I will basically, at the end of the talk, give you the perspectives towards the coherent spin transfer. This is our real goal within this project. Let me first typically. No. Why it doesn't want to?
This is not a quantum computer yet.
I will do that like this. This is okay now. So this work is a collaboration between 3 institutes. Our group that we led with Christopher Bowerley and myself at Institut Néel, and I will point out the main contributors. So Benoît Bertrand, who finished his PhD like 1 year ago, Sylvain Hermelin for the first part on the charge transport, and Shintaro Takada, who made the structure in Tokyo and then joined us in Grenoble to perform a SO-related experiment in our lab, and I will present some of his work. And the structure that we use are grown by Andreas Wick at Boron University. And so, typically the context of this research is the international effort to use the spin of an electrons to process quantum information. So this is typical pictures of the sample that we use. We can trap in this type of aluminum gallium arsenide structures single electrons, and then to manipulate and to control quantum mechanically the internal spin states of these structures. So we can read out the spin of these electrons very easily. We will go back to that in a moment. We can initialize it just by applying a magnetic field in order to take advantage either of the tunneling process to the dot or by the spin relaxation process. We can irradiate the sample with some microwave at the Larmor frequency in order to realize a 1-qubit operation, typically what we call Rabi oscillations. We can make them interact, and this is done by controlling the position of the 2 dots and to control the overlap of the wave function to induce exchange interaction between the 2 close-by electrons in these structures. And this work has started in gallium arsenide, and it has received a lot of attention recently because of the fact that in silicon purified structures, we are now achieving like coherence time and relaxation time that can approach like milliseconds timescales. And the basic message of this is to say that nowadays the figures of merits of the spin qubits are comparable to the most advanced system, the superconducting qubits, and therefore in this system we are like facing the same question that they face: what's next, and how can we scale this system up? And this is the real question nowadays. You might have heard of it, but this is really a recent thing for spin qubits. Actually, this is this paper here that shows that in 2014 that we can now be pretty confident that within like silicon we can realize fault-tolerant quantum operation for spin qubits. So the scalability, before that time we say that we are using semiconductor systems, so we will take advantage of the whole semiconductor industry in order to scale it up. So that was like a nice idea, but I think it was too simple. And I think that there is like very big challenges that are underway. And so typically our projects in Grenoble try to basically a little bit address this question now, but in gallium arsenide, but this is the same question, we can implement it back to silicium if we need afterwards. So the idea is that you have many of these trap systems, and in order to build, it depends a little bit on the architectures, But to build something which is a larger quantum nanoprocessor, you are going to be able to interconnect these different qubits together. At the least price, you can basically do this only with close-by neighbors. This is okay. You can also benefit from doing that at long distance. Okay, and you have to do this quantum mechanically. Okay, you don't have choice. And the story is that you need to do that with a quantum particle. You need to exchange in between these two qubits a quantum particle. And what can it be? Okay, we had like many propositions during this nice workshop. The first one is to copy a little bit what has been done in superconducting qubits and to exchange a photon. Okay, so you take this was the talk yesterday of Andreas Wallraff. And the first experiment has been done in Princeton, and we have an activity going into that direction also in France at LPR in the group of Takis Kontos. The problem with this is the fact that spin, and this is why we like spin, is extremely protected from electrical perturbation, and so this is hardly coupled to the photons. This is a microscopic system, so this is difficult to have like decent coupling. And so far, the experiment that we have on this subject show that this coupling is very, very small. Okay, and this is very, very small in comparison with what you can observe, for example, in superconducting qubits, because this is only a macroscopic system that you consider. Okay, so it might at some point go to the strong coupling regime, but to really do something interesting, we have to go deep into this strong coupling regime. Okay, so we heard about like here the community is extremely interested to not consider as an incident particle photons, but phonons, and the reason for that is the fact that phonons has a smaller wavelength, and therefore the energy that is trapped within the phonons is going to be, you are going to be able to trap the same energy, but on a very, very small volume. And in this case, the electric field that you are going to generate is going to be much higher than what you can have for the photons, and therefore have higher couplings. So that's why people are really looking a little bit about phonons to transfer the information. And we had a talk 2 days ago, I think, about this by Professor Fujisawa, which is the first experiment to couple a double quantum dot to the field induced in the SAW cavities. Okay, and I think that there is a lot of things to do in these systems to explore and to see how far we can go in terms of coupling to the SAW and to be able to, at the end of the day, interface different qubits using this SAW, because we saw with the talk of Per Delsing that we can also couple easily with superconducting qubits. So our strategy is to realize that it's completely different, is to realize that the electrons are quantum, this is a quantum particle, and they are movable within the structure. So why not trying to control the displacement of a single electron throughout the structure to interconnect different nodes of the quantum processor, this trap of electrons. And in this way, you do something which can be thought as an electronics at the single electron levels, except that now you are at low temperature, you have quantum particles, so you do something which can be thought as quantum spintronics. Okay, and then to keep this coherence, this information that is stored in the electrons, you need, which is the important message here, we have to basically keep the electron isolated from the other electrons of the structure. And this is a semiconductor structures, and in order to avoid mixing with the other electrons, in order to not lose this information, I should keep it isolated. And the whole goal of this business is to try to displace the electron and control the displacement completely isolated from the other electron of the structure. Okay? So please, you can interrupt me anytime if you have questions. Okay, so a first way to do that is you have this large array of quantum dots, and you can think that you can displace the electron by making the electron hopping from one dot to the other, like this, and the initial process is going to be tunneling. So there has been like a lot of tentative with this. So I will talk. We have our own business about this, which is a circular quantum dots, where we can basically make the electron hopping from on a closed path like this and make some turns. And this is interesting for the spin orbit oriented people, because you can have, like in this situation, some kind of non-abelian manipulation of the spin that is happening in this case. You can make that on a line of quantum dots, and that has been proven recently that you can transfer the electron back and forth over distances of 80 microns. This was in the group of Lieven van der Sijpen recently. The problem is that if you want to do that on a very long scale, you have to control many gates, and the overhead in control seems to be like detrimental to go to distances of 10 microns, so to speak. The second aspect is that to control the tunneling from one dot to the other, this is a quite slow process. You can basically maybe achieve something like 100 meters per second, but not more than this. Okay? So our strategy is to use electron transfer with moving quantum dots that are induced by the source. So to make a little bit a comparison with the previous things, the phonons are used to trap the electrons, and so the mediator of the quantum information is going to be the electron spin itself. And in comparison with the work of Professor Fujisawa, we have many electrons, and the field of phonons is classical. We don't want to have a quantum field in this case to propagate the electrons. Okay, so this is going to be my goal now, to present you all the necessary bricks to understand how we perform the transfer and how we analyze the spin transfer of an electron. So the starting point is going to be that we use a two-dimensional electron gas that is present in aluminum, gallium arsenide heterostructure, and the 2DEG is 100 nanometers below the surface. In this type of structure, you can define gate on top where you apply negative voltage on it, and with this gate you can deplete the electron underneath, and in this way, with a smart design of the gate, you can define places where you can trap the electrons, isolate the electron from the other electrons, which are in blue in these pictures, and in this way realize what we call quantum dot or trap foreign electrons. Okay? In contrary from the talk of this morning, we probe everything by transport. So this means that we can contact the 2DEG with what we call ohmic contact and control the flow of electrons through the structure, and this is the way that we probe the structure. Okay? So this is typically like a single quantum dot here that we can control and identify. And the thing is that you can, to probe the electrons, we don't probe it by sending flowing current through the structure. We probe it by defining an electrometer close by. This electrometer is nothing but a transistor, but a nanoscale transistor that is extremely sensitive to the environment. So this means that if the electrostatic environment is changing, it's going to change the conductance, and I will see jumps into this conductance. And so you can see that here, when I tune the quantum dot in such a way that the chemical potential of the single electron is aligned with the Fermi energy of the reservoir, I will have the situation where a single electron in real time will jump out, jump in, jump out, jump in, jump out in real time, and I can observe it. And this is the reason why this whole business is possible, is basically that due to nanoscale fabrication, we are able to put the probe as close as possible to our system and reach the single electron regime, which is mandatory if you want to study single object and quantum mechanically. Okay? So that's the first thing. So as I said before, we had to define two of these quantum dots separated by a certain distance, which are going to be a few micrometers. And the real challenge is to propagate and control the displacement of the electrons, but by keeping it isolated from the other electron of the structure. So here is typically the sample that a drawing of the sample that we use. This is the two quantum dot systems that are separated by 4 microns, and in between these two quantum dots, I will define large gates that I will polarize, and these large gates will allow me to basically remove the electrons on the path between the two quantum dots in order that the electrons stay isolated, so to speak. Okay? So let's make a cut of the potential of this device. Here you have the source quantum dot, which is now close by to the Fermi energy. Here is the reception dot. And in between, you see that I constructed, due to these large gates, a large potential that is above the Fermi energy. So if there is like electrons within this structure, it will basically go down. And I will remove all the possible the electrons within the structure, in between the two quantum dots. Okay? So in this way, I kind of isolate the system. After that, in order to protect the electrons, I pump the electrons above the Fermi energy, and in order to keep it, I realize a very large gate, and this is by controlling the quantum dot gates. And I do that on both ends here. And this is typically the starting point, and at that moment, I start to basically shine microwave in order to assist to propel the electron through the structure. So this surface acoustic wave, now you had a lot of nice introduction about it. We just like, I will go back in a minute to that, but we use IDT to generate this surface acoustic wave. By piezoelectric effect, it will result in propagating sinusoidal potential that will be superimposed to the potential induced by the gate. And we made this animation to show you how the things how the electron transfer is made. You have a large excitation of the electrons, and the electrons is first transferred to a moving quantum dot into one of these minima here. You can see propel it over 5 microns at a time scale of like typically 1.4 micrometer, and then we need this very large tunnel barrier at the end in order to stop the electrons and to keep it inside this reception dot. Okay. So the sample looks like this. You have like the central structure here that I already presented. 2 millimeters away from the structure, we define the single IDT. We are not very demanding in terms of IDT performance because, as you see, we just need to generate. So source, so we can basically afford to put as much power as we need in order to create the right potential to trap the electrons. Okay. Nonetheless, we put it like very far away at 2 millimeters. This is to avoid, and I think that there has been like a lot of discussion about this. This is to avoid direct coupling from the IDT to the structure that you are going to manipulate. Since this is single electron, they are extremely sensitive to the perturbation induced by the excitation that we apply on the IDT, and then we have to take care of this and try to avoid as much as possible this type of perturbation. Okay, so the surface acoustic wave, you had many introductions, so I will not go into the details. You know by now that this is like this evanescent wave that exists at the interface between a system where phonons can propagate and with vacuum, typically. We can test this IDT by looking at the reflection measurements at high frequency. We see a peak, and this peak tells you that basically you have a transfer, a conversion of the electrical energy into phononic energy, and this is where we can generate surface acoustic waves in the sample. The typical frequency is 2.6 gigahertz. And that corresponds to a wavelength of 1 micron, which is the separation between the typical pitch of our IDT, which is 1 micron. Okay. So now I will go one by one to the characterization of the samples. The two quantum dots, you can typically look at how we can remove the electron one by one by recording what we call the stability diagram. The stability diagrams are characterized by lines, and these lines correspond to the situation where I remove one electron from the quantum dot. So you see that every time I have this electron that is changing, 2, 1, 0, and when the gates are very negative, I will enter in the regime that is called the few electron regime, where I empty completely the electrons within the quantum dot. Okay, and that is consistent with the fact that I'm pushing a lot to the structure. So in this situation, controllably with controlling the potential on the two gates, I can bring the system into this into this region and isolate only one electron. Okay? Another feature which is a little bit unconventional is the fact that this line, this degeneracy line that you see here, are stopping at some point. The reason why they are stopped is the fact that while I'm changing this gate, the VB gate, which is this gate here, which is not the good label, the VL gate it's used to basically to make a thick barrier. So at some point, when I go more negative on this gate, I will increase the time it needs for the electron to get out, and at some point it will become larger than the typical time of the sweeping time that we use to record this graph. And at some point it will not be able, during the time of the experiment, to get out of the dot. This is exactly what we want. Huh? So this is when I was saying that we wanted to have to bring the electron above the Fermi energy in order to keep it isolated from the SO, we want to make this barrier as thick as possible for the measurement. Okay, and so this is typically the way that we realize this experiment where we isolate the electrons. We start in a system which is empty here in this situation. We bring the system in a region where the loading is relatively fast. In this situation, we load one electron, and then we pulse the system in this region above the Fermi energy, but with relatively large and thick barrier, in order to keep the electron for a time, for minutes if we want, during the experiment. But in this situation here, we will be in comparison with this situation, closer to the chemical potential of the channel, and therefore we expect to have a transfer of the electron, which is going to be easier to realize at a certain power. The results of this manipulation on the QPC is shown here. What we observe mainly is the capacitive coupling between the gates and the QPC, which results in this form here that mimic a little bit the potential that we apply on the gate. But in between 200 milliseconds and 1 second, you see that in this case there is no movement of the gate, and we see a step which basically indicates that the electron, which is above the Fermi energy, finally, after 500 milliseconds, is getting out of the quantum dot. So we can do many of this experiment and average it, and what we obtain is simply the exponential decay of the electrons in the reservoir, from the dot to the reservoir, with a typical time scale that you can fit. And this is just observing in real time the tunneling process from the quantum dot to the reservoir. Okay, so I can keep it here 700 milliseconds, but we can keep it for hours if we like. It just depends on how thick you are going to build your barrier. This was without SO. This is the regular tunneling process. If I add SO now, what is happening is the fact that right at the time where I shine SO on the system, the electron is basically expelled from the source dot. And so, and you see immediately on this graph that this process is extremely efficient. We go immediately, and there is no change in the population afterwards, meaning that already you can have a signature that the process is going to be extremely efficient. But we don't know where the electrons went. It could have been transferred on the other side, but it could have been also sent to the reservoir. For that, we have only one solution: is to look at what happens on the other side of the sample. Okay. So for that, we need to prepare and to what we call arm the detector. And for that, I told you already, but I repeat here, that we need to, the source is a driving force. So we need to have enough large barrier to stop the electrons, even though the electrons is excited by the source. So the idea is similar. I can initialize the system with 0 electron. I remove all the electrons of the structure to be able to capture it. And then after that, I pulse negatively to be again above the Fermi energy, but with a large barrier in order to avoid that the electron, even though it is excited by the SO, it's going to be kept inside the reception quantum dot. Okay, so the similar story for the reception dot. So let me summarize the process. We start with the 2 electrons, we initialize the 2 dots with 1 electron on the source dot, 0 electron in the reception dot. we pulse the two dots above the Fermi energy with large barrier on both sides in order to protect the electrons from the SO excitation, and that it can go only in one direction. This is the transport direction. And then at that time, I will basically shine microwave in order to promote the electron, to transfer the electron from one end to the other. And what I will do is that I will look at the charge transfer, at the charge population on both dots before and after the SO burst, before and after the SO transfer. Okay? So here is typically like real-time data. So this is single real-time, single-shot data. So in single realization of the experiment for the source dot and for the reception dot. You see that most of the time, what we observe on this curve is the fact that the source dot go from 1 electron to 0 electron. So an electron has been sent, effectively, has been removed from the source dot. And you see that coincidentally, you observe on the other side of the sample, which basically makes the demonstration of the transfer, that the reception dot is going from 0 electron to 1 electron. These events are coincidental, meaning that basically we can say that with this, we demonstrate that effectively charge has been transferred from the source dot to the reception dot. You see immediately also that the transfer is extremely efficient. We have some case where we have problem of loading the quantum dot with 1 electron, or that the electrons is leaving the source dot, but we miss it on the other side. That happens. But this is very, very few events. And nowadays, we approach the 99% efficiency. It depends only on your capability to close this barrier as much as you can, to protect the electron from the SO. Okay, I should mention that this experiment has been done in two places independently, in our lab and in the lab of Chris Ford in Cambridge. And they had this nice feature that we didn't have in the experiment, is the ability to do this ping-pong thing in between the two dots, because they had two working IDT and we had only one. This was unfortunate, but this was like this. Sometimes IDTs are not working perfectly. For us, we had another specificity, which basically we tried to investigate what was happening also for 2 electrons. And we succeed in the same way as before to load not only 1 electron but 2 electrons, and to look at if we can basically send the electron on the other side of the sample, and look if we have, when we send 2 electrons, receive 2 electrons. The process is a little bit less efficient. So,
shift the 0 electron line to work with 2 electrons before the source burst or in between.
I didn't get it. Sorry.
So when you had 1 electron, you had a step between 0 and 1.
Yeah.
With 2 electrons, it seems you have a step between more than 0. So the upper line goes up.
A little bit? Yeah, this is charge noise. Yeah, so this little shift that you see here? Yeah, this is charge noise. So don't forget that I'm exciting the structure quite heavily. We are not talking about minus 130 dBm pair, but we are talking about like something like, I think, in between 0 and 10 dBm. This is huge amount of excitation that we produce because we don't want to be at the single electron level. So, and I presume that the DX centers and all this impurity that is present within the structure are shaken up quite a bit.
But it looks like a positive charge, which you always have, because it's a shift up.
Yeah, but it goes down a little bit. It is this, yeah, so maybe, yeah, this is a wrong selection of the, I should basically, no, but this is single realization, yeah, Per.
So how sensitive is this good transfer rate to the power, solar power? Is this a very narrow window in power, or is it in fact rather broad?
So we analyze this in detail. So in power, yeah, I will not present this data. So in power, this is, yeah, I will try to make a simple question. So as much as you increase, you have a threshold typically. above which you are going to emit the electrons. The problem is that if you don't pay attention, in this situation, we are like changing the potential at the microsecond time scales. So this means that basically you have like the rise time of the IDT that you are going to explore. At the beginning of the IDT, you are going to be above and below the thresholds. You can basically probe precisely what is happening with the power to get rid of the IDT rise time by using the nanoseconds triggering. And then you see that this is relatively sharp. You see like a typical activation low that you observe with a typical width of I think that's 5 dBm or something like this that you can see 100 millivolt typically on the SAW power, and that's an activation. This is not extremely sharp. What we can demonstrate is that we can go from 0 with an activation low towards 100%, and with a width which is dependent on the way that we basically are going to inject the electrons. Okay, we can discuss that. This is a very long discussion that we submitted, that we published it recently in a paper. This process of injection of the electrons, how the electrons is going from the static dot to the moving dot, is not at all something which is clearly understood for the moment. We need to have more and more insight about this. Okay.
Can I just make a simple question related to that? The amount of acoustic power you need to transport 2 electrons is the same one as one electron?
Yeah, so approximately the same, but we can gain for sure. Yeah, so this power is a compromise with how much I can basically isolate my electrons. And the reason why the 80% is 80% is the fact that the second electron is above, he has to pay the charging energy, so he's higher in energy, so he can get out more easily. Okay, so I need to basically make stronger confinement potential in order to keep it more efficient. Yes. Okay. Yeah, and recently. This was like results from 2011. We continue to do this work, but we complexify a little bit our system now. We see this type of sample, so this is crowded, but you have like 4 dots. This is 2 source dots and 2 reception dots, and they are like linked by 2 type of. You can have different type of path. Either you go up or you go down. And this is what we wanted to implement. It is some kind of tunneling, but what we implemented at the end was simply a single electron directional coupler that you can control with the gate voltage. And so you see the success rate of this event on the side. So you can easily, by changing the voltage that you apply on these 2 gates here, either push the electron on one of this path or the others controllably, and you can do that for one, but for 2 electrons, you can basically either like separate the 2 electrons on one end, separate on the other end, and have it like separated, that the 2 electrons are going in the same path, the 2 electrons on the other path, or separated in the 2 paths. Okay, but
so 2 electrons probably always have a singlet. So can you separate the singlet?
Okay, so this was the next point. So far, I think that will answer the question. So far, we didn't see any quantum effects with this. So at the moment, we are basically, this is a collision of electrons, so to speak. So this is what we wanted to do. But due to the specific, the way that we propel the electrons and the excitation that the electron is undergoing along the propagation, we cannot observe coherent effects for the moment. Okay, but for sure that if I have like, if in the ideal case, if I have like some kind of a collision of the electrons, we know that basically there are fermions. We need to basically take into account their spin in order to see how they are going to be separated. But for the moment, this is just classical separation, meaning that basically the electron has 50% of the case in this situation, 50% of the case to go in one direction, 50% of the case to go in the other direction, and as if they are not feeding each other. Okay.
But did you synchronize the 2 electrons in the same?
Yes, we did.
Really?
Yes, we did. So yeah, I'm ready to discuss. So we synchronize. So you will see that we have very nice data where we can basically send the electrons in only one minimum. This is recent data that we have, and we implemented it here. And we didn't observe like the charge gap that should basically exist when basically two electrons are colliding. And most likely this is due to the static disorder potential that you have in this structure. Okay, this is we are far away from a clean path for the electrons. They are like experiencing a lot of bumps, and due to the fact that you drive the system with surface acoustic wave, they are shaken, and the energy is larger for the moment than the typical gap that you expect from electron-electron interaction. Okay? Okay, very good. Spin transfer experiments, we have everything. And we are going to ask the second question of this presentation, is whether we can basically or not keep the spin information during the transport. What happened to the spin degree of freedom during this transport, okay? For that, I have one tool, which is the transfer of the electrons. I need a second tool, which is to have like a spin readout procedure, which is compatible with this transfer procedure. And I need also, for the purpose of quantifying how much spin is going to be like transfer or not, I need to basically be able to initialize different spin states. And I will explain you how it works in the following. So to read out the spin, we take advantage of the energy separation that I can imply in this type of structure. For a single electron, we apply a magnetic field of 3 Tesla, so to speak, in order to leave the degeneracy between spin up and spin down. Okay? For 2 electrons, and that will be like, I will basically be able to measure the spin states only at high magnetic field in this case. For 2 electrons, the relevant spin states are singlet and triplet, and we know that basically the energy separation is due to exchange interaction. In our system, singlet and triplet are the degeneracy lifted by approximately 1 millieV. So that allows us to explore the regime of transfer for low magnetic field, and that will be like important in the following. So the idea of the measurement is the following. We can tune the quantum dot in such a way that the excited spin state is above the Fermi energy and the ground spin state is below the Fermi energy. In this case, if the electron is in the ground spin state, there is no states available to get out of the dot, so electrons will remain still in the quantum dot, and you observe no event at all, nothing changed on the electrometers. The situation is different for excited spin states, since in this case, there are 3 available states for the electron to get out, so it will get out, and an electron will jump in to restore, to go back to equilibrium, and therefore I will have like the signature of a steps which will indicate to me that I am in the excited spin state. Okay, so, but that is possible only, so that will allow me to distinguish between spin up and spin down, but that is only possible where I am like close to the Fermi energy, where the system is coupled, can exchange electrons with the reservoir. And so, and it's completely a different situation than the position where I realize the transfer. You remember that I need to be completely isolated from the reservoir. So before, and to have a compatible spin readout procedure, I need to bring the system from the transfer position to the measurement position. And that can be like a little bit detrimental for the spin, but you will see in a minute that we don't see any kind of effect on the spin of this additional movement that makes the 2 procedures compatible. Okay? Okay, so I have a spin state measurement that is compatible now. And the way that I will initialize the spin state is just by taking advantage of our ability to control the spin relaxation process. So what I do is that during the loading of the electrons, I will have a significant proportion of the spin state that will be in the excited spin states. And if I control the timescale between the loading of the electrons and the measurement of the electrons, I will observe what is called the spin relaxation process that you see here, that the population either of the spin down or the triplet is going exponentially down. And this is just the fact that the electrons is reaching on a millisecond timescale is equilibrium, which is the ground spin state. And this measurement has been done, and we see no obvious difference with adding the movement toward the transfer position or without adding the movement to the transfer positions. So saying that in this situation, I prove that I can measure the spin with milliseconds timescale relaxation time. And in addition, I can control the initial spin state by just controlling this time t wait. Okay?
So if you would apply ESI, you could also start with up plus down.
So this is completely true, but in this type of system, ESR is, in gallium arsenide, ESR are difficult to implement. This is easier for the purpose to show, like, this is a difficult experiment for people in spin qubits because of the spin decoherence time. I will go back to that in a minute. Pasquale.
Just briefly comment on maybe really bit about visibility and offset in this one measurement.
So you're a specialist, so I can go first. 3 Tesla, electron temperature 200 milli-K. We are at the limit of what we can do. The energy separation has to be larger than the temperature of the electrons. For 3 Tesla, we were just at the limit. We just had like something which was like 10%. For this value here, you know that it depends on where you put the threshold. We maximize the threshold in order to have the maximum. You optimize the threshold in order to have the maximum contrast. Okay. I cannot resist to tell you that we analyzed these T1 measurements when I was in Delft by changing the energy separation between spin states. We analyzed the relaxation rate, and we observe a non-monotonous behavior with a peak right at this energy for the phonon which is emitted, which corresponds to the size of the dot, and this is directly connected to what Stefan Ludwig was saying this morning about like this matching between the size of the dot and the wavelength of the electron, where the coupling to the electron between the electron and the phonon is maximum. Okay. So let's go back to the spin transfer. So now we have everything, and we can start to look at the results of these experiments. We assembled all the pieces together. So the first experiments, we do it with 2 electrons. We load 2 electrons close to the Fermi energy. We just bring them in this isolated position where I am isolated. I'm controlling the time t-wait to change the initial spin state in order to change it. Then we apply the surface acoustic wave, and at the end of the day, we bring back the 2 electrons when they are in the reception down to where they are coupled to the reservoir, and we perform the spin readout. And so then we observe a spin relaxation. We can interpret this procedure as a non-local spin relaxation measurement, because the spin relaxation happens here, and I measure the spin state afterwards, after transfer. Okay, so therefore this is a non-local measurement, and you see that I keep some kind of information about the fact that the electron is decaying. It's decaying with a time scale which is similar to the one that I reported before, when the electron is still within the quantum dot and it remains in the same quantum dot. And then we can conclude that in this way we transfer spin information using individual electrons. The second parameter that is important for us is the contrast. And if I compare the calibration and the results after transfer, you see that only 30% of the spin information remains after transfer. This is related to 65% fidelity for the spin transfer procedure from the source quantum dot to the reception quantum dot. So we wanted to investigate a little bit this to understand where this loss of spin were coming from. So so we changed for the 2 electron case. This experiment was done at 100 millitesla. We didn't see so much change at 200 millitesla. We changed also like the gate, the voltage that we have on the gate in the middle, in order to basically try to probe for the specialist if there is like some spin orbit effect that can explain the spin depolarization. We didn't observe anything, and finally we started to go at much higher magnetic field at 3 Tesla. And we did that for the 1 electron case. We repeat the same experiment, loading with 1 electron, waiting in order to change the spin states, transfer the electrons, and measure it after that at 3 Tesla. And we observe, again, the same magnitude of spin fidelity, or approximately 62%. Okay? So, we basically investigate what can be the results of this problem, and then most of the work that has been done on moving quantum dots from a theoretical aspect has been done by Professor Hu at University of Buffalo, and he calculates precisely what is the effect of the movement of the electrons in a moving quantum dot with some kind of disorder potential, and this is the disorder potential that I was referring to before. The electrons is not going straight from one dot to the other, is experiencing some kind of like wandering from the source dot to the reception dot. And this effect, due to the spin orbit or due to lateral hyperfine coupling for the specialist, can give rise to transverse effects that can flip the spin. Okay? And you can ask me, but why it's going to flip its spins, where the energy comes from to flip the spins, since we have like a separation in energy. Don't forget that we drive the system. The system is driven. So we basically add all the time energy, and this energy can be taken by the electron to flip its spin. Okay? The output of the discussion is to say that the time scale to flip is at fast 110 nanoseconds. And we are doing a transport over like 1 nanosecond. So this cannot be like this process. There is other reason that you can ask if you want, but we don't think that this is the right mechanism for us. And we did an additional experiment to probe where it can come from, and this is an experiment where we look at what happened to the spin when this is exposed to SO irradiation, but when we keep the electrons in one quantum dot. As it is basically shown in this measurement, the electron is basically experiencing a lot of perturbation due to the SO and due to the strength of the SO, and that has to have some consequences to the spin. Okay? So, and this is the result of this experiment when we start from the initial ground spin state for the green curve, or superposition, a mixed state between spin up and spin down. You see that as I increase the SO duration, I start to mix between spin up and spin down. So this is a direct coupling. This is an observation of a direct coupling between the SO and the spin, most likely mediated by spin orbit interaction, because the electron is moving back and forth, and this moving back and forth can result in the spin mixing. I don't have spin information after these things, and we analyze a little bit more. I can give you like some more effect, but this is the main mechanism that we believe limit our fidelity for the moment. So yeah, let's if you can see this here, yeah, we cannot easily like say if it's spin orbit or lateral hyperfine. You know, these two coupling mechanisms are approximately of the same strength. Like few milliteslas for B here. This is it can be 20 millitesla for when we are moving, and when we are exciting, this is close by. So I cannot have like a definite proof. What I can tell you is that this is mostly due to the fact that we have like a double dot potential that you saw, and that basically induce like transfer back and forth in between the two spin states, in between the two dots, and that results in the exploration of like a lot of anti-crossings, spin anti-crossing, that can result in the back and forth in the spin mixing.
What is that 3 Tesla?
Sorry?
That's 3 Tesla.
Yeah, but you are like you have like two dots. You are doing this.
And orbit is 3 Tesla is quite weak, isn't it?
No, yeah, this is completely true, but in a single dot, this is true. But if you have double dots, you can basically compensate the 3 Tesla by the change in the alignment of the two dots. So then you can basically exactly compensate with this, and you are doing like anti-crossing between this. I think this is relatively well identified process for this. Okay.
So how would the fidelity then drop further or improve if you go from 4 microns to, let's say, 10 microns, or just back to 2 microns?
So, as I told you, in this work, this is typically, the spin flip process that can arise is typically on the order of 10 to 100 nanoseconds. So I have to extend it by, for the moment, the time scales between my two dots is 1.5 nanoseconds. So if I go to 40 microns, it will become comparable to the spin flip process. So I need to extend it quite a bit, and we will end up, so to speak, to the measurements of the Paul Drude Institute, where they observe 100 micron, so to speak, coherence propagation length on ensemble of electrons. I think we should go into that direction. It's compatible with what Professor Hu derived in his paper. Okay, conclusions and perspective. Yeah. So I demonstrate to you that we are able to transfer the spin, an electron quite efficiently. We can effectively transfer spin information using individual electrons with a fidelity which is 65% in this case. I'm sorry for this error. The last question that remains, what about the coherence? Okay? This is the main question, because if you want to use this type of technology in a quantum processor, you need to address these questions. So we recently demonstrated for the first time that coherent displacement is possible for individual electrons in a structure. But this was not done with slow-moving quantum dots. This was done in arrays of quantum dots, where the process of displacement, the tunneling process, is much more known. Okay, so we did that in this three quantum dot system, and in this system we can load an electron here and make it turn around like this, and control how long I can propagate on a cycle like this. And I can compare the situation where the electrons remain still, or if the electrons is rotated. So when the electron remains still, you see that we observe typical decoherence time, which is 10 nanoseconds in these structures. This is the situation here. And this is well known. This is due to the coupling to the nuclei, the hyperfine interaction. And when I start to basically move around the electrons, like this, to our surprise, we see a significant increase of the decoherence time. This increase is a factor of 10 with respect to what is observed, and this is a factor of 10 and an equivalent coherent distance of 6 microns. I know that the poster is not present anymore, but Arnaud has presented these results in his poster that was presented here. This is the first demonstration that a coherent displacement is possible at the single electron level in a gallium arsenide heterostructure.
What's the rotation speed?
So the rotation speed is 100 meters per second. 100 meters per second, so this is...
How many rounds per the coherence time?
So for this particular term, we have like approximately 25 turns. 25 turns. I think this is 25 turns, and this is the time scale per turns. So we go there. We wait 1 nanosecond, 1 nanosecond, 1 nanosecond. We do like cycle like this, and in this situation we obtain this evolution. 1 point is. No, but this is time here. So per turn, this is 5 nanoseconds per turn. Okay?
But here you go in a circle.
Yeah.
And with your source you want to go straight.
Yeah.
And can you say whether this enhancement of the coherence is related to going in a circle? Will you still see it if you go straight?
Wait, it will be like soon on archive. We can discuss that. It's going to be like so. What we don't have like significant for the moment. We don't have significant. We don't have reasons to believe that will be a difference between the two processes. The enhancement that we observe is completely compatible with the derivation of the Professor Hu at Buffalo. So this is completely.
The opposite direction. I would say that you have a very different process to transport the electrons here, and you go in a circle, and so you cannot expect that anything like this can be observed in a system where
You should have. Did he visit your poster? You should have visited his poster. No. This is extremely surprising that we observe this factor of 10 enhancement, and this is completely consistent with the fact that we have like some kind of moving quantum dot and not only tunneling. We have some kind of moving quantum dot happening in this type of structures. Since we are basically moving the electrons from one quantum dot to the other, we have the tunneling process, but not only the tunneling process. And what is dominating is the moving quantum dots in this process. Okay? Okay? Yeah? New measurements. Next time.
So,
Yeah.
I think I asked you about that. If you reverse the motion.
Yeah. So we didn't observe any kind of things by reversing the motion, which basically
You don't measure coherence, you just measure T1 here.
no, I measure coherence.
Yeah?
Yeah. So this is a special. So what we do is that for the specialist, we do not a single electron, a 2 electron, and we started in singlet and we separate it in order to create a superposition of states, which is basically up down minus down up. And we rotate them and we say we look at how much singlet is preserved. So I'm looking at coherence. This is really the first measurements of coherence while moving the electrons. Okay?
Does it depend on the speed of rotation?
So you give me some time? Or the speed of rotation is a little bit difficult because I have to pulse in order to go from one dot to the other. And this pulse is, it has a finite rise time. And this is difficult to make it like, this is with the AWG, we just make a pulse and it has a certain bandwidth. And this time scale is typically, we do 100 nanometers per 1 nanoseconds. This is the rise time of my AWG, and therefore I go to the 1 meter per second that I was mentioning to Yasu. Yeah. So really fast. So the problem is the fact that for the SAW transport, yeah, less is known about it, but the SAW moving quantum dots are created, there is a train of SAW moving quantum dots. And this typical excitation is going to be 200 nanoseconds or 100 nanoseconds, which is much longer than the typical coherence time that I presented just a minute ago. So this means that basically, if I don't control where I'm going to put the electrons, I will have a dephasing time, an artificial dephasing time that I need to control. So the first thing that I need to do is to implement, in addition to all what we implemented, we need to implement also like a fast injection and to be able to put one electron exactly where I want in exactly the same moving quantum dot. So you have two ways to do that. Either you increase the bandwidth of your IDT, but you cannot go like much below like 20 nanoseconds. The second idea is to control the potential and to switch on nanosecond timescale between a position where the transfer doesn't happen to a situation for only 1 nanosecond where the transfer is happening. So this is typically the first result that we have. We see that we apply a pulse gate of 1 nanosecond and we apply a burst of a SAW burst. And only around the region where basically 760 nanoseconds, we observe significant transfer. Why is that? It's simply because of the fact that the surface acoustic wave has to propagate through the quantum dot structures, and that has some finite time in comparison to the speed of light for the pulse excitation. What I'm saying is that the speed of sound is different than the speed of light. Okay, this is clear. And you see that I'm come switch from pretty much 0 counts, 0 transfer, to pretty much 100% transfer. Okay, but this is only like nanoseconds per, so I don't know. I can control it, but I don't know really in which of these minima I can. We use a faster AWG, and what we observe is that now this peak here has now a structure inside. Okay. The structure inside is basically due to the fact that now I'm using a 100 picoseconds pulse. And with 100 picoseconds, I'm faster than the typical period of the SAW excitation. And so then I observe transfer only when there is a minimum of the SAW excitation in front of the pulse. Okay? And then I can say that here I can inject effectively in one minimum. Okay? And this is to answer to your question. We implement this type of things with the collision, and we didn't observe the thing. This is recent work of Dr. Takada in our group. Okay, and finally, the last thing is that if we want to implement everything, we need to be able to control the spin states close by in this transfer position. We need to do that because for spin information, it was not detrimental to move back and forth from the measurement position to the transfer position. For coherence, we expect that to be like really detrimental. So we implemented some kind of, I will go fast, huh? Some kind of like manipulation in this isolated configuration, and we recently obtained, so this is typically in this isolated configuration where we have a double dot. We are going to realize like coherent flip-flop between two spin states in this isolated position where they are like above the Fermi energy. And we succeed to do that, so in a situation where we are compatible with the transfer situation. And we did that recently, and we observe also an improve in terms of like the manipulation that we can perform on this coherent flip-flop. And with this, I think that I will wrap it up, and yeah, thank you for your attention.
One question about the spin transfer. You explained that this loss of spin population came from this spin-orbit interaction where you loaded the moving quantum dot, right? But this should be a unitary process, shouldn't it? So if you were measuring a different spin direction at the receiving end, shouldn't you then see a higher polarization? Is there maybe it's just a unitary rotation happening in the loading and deloading process?
Yeah, so my answer to this question is that for the moment we don't have evidence of like unitary evolution with this. This is more complicated than this, and our explanation is that we are going through like anti-crossings that are and we go through like adiabatically, non-adiabatically, and then this is like basically inducing spin mixing. We don't think that this is for the moment controlled at the point where this is deterministic. Okay. No, yeah, we need to get better control in order to reach this. That would be interesting, actually, what you said.
But if it is coherent and the spin still flips, then you cannot see the difference. You have to do the right measurement.
Yeah, of course. No, this is with respect to what he wants. Yeah, no, this is completely true. So I need to, I need somehow to, if it's deterministic, it will be like somewhere, and then I need to compensate the whole thing in order to basically, for the moment, we didn't do that, and it needs to have like a good single qubit operation. As I said, this is not so easy to implement in gallium arsenide, but we believe for the moment that we are like way away from this regime.
Any other question?
For the enhanced spin lifetime again in the circle, if you compare the time scales of the hyperfine interaction, the energy scale with the times you spend in one dot. So could it be, if you, for example, if you switch between the different positions faster than that's the time scale, that there's kind of, I don't know the right term, but the system has no time to dephase basically.
You have to wait for the things. So we have like explored like many regimes and whether depending on the tunnel coupling between the dots. So a way to answer your question is the fact that once I am separated, this is the time I spend separated, which counts. And this time where I am separated is I can compare it directly, because when I'm doing this, I'm always separated somehow. And when I do this, I am separated. So these time scales, they are exactly like the one that we compare on this measurement. This is exactly the time that I spend separated. So in this case, we expect, and we have like different measurements, but we expect the exchange interaction to be completely negligible. This is the situation where exchange interaction is completely negligible. I can think about them completely separated. Sorry? But the hyperfine interaction will basically result in some kind of, so I didn't tell you which one is going to explain this. Okay, but the hyperfine interaction is also a possible explanation for the limit that you have here. Okay, but it's somehow this is dominated by hyperfine interaction, and somehow hyperfine interaction has been somehow changed during this process of turning. Here? Yeah. Here? No. Here, this is done at 2. No, this one. The dot-to-dot transfer. This is at 3 Tesla, yeah.
Yeah, so when you use 3 Tesla, if your electron transfer efficiency reduces, or it's no difference?
When I change the magnetic field, you mean?
Yeah, will turn the magnetic field.
When I?
Will turn the magnetic field.
So this is at so at zero magnetic field. So the problem is that for one electron, I cannot go at zero magnetic field because I don't have like spin selectivity anymore.
I mean for the electron transfer. I mean, without magnetic field, you say a single electron transfer efficiency can be maybe 99% or
No, I didn't say that.
or with 95% or something like that.
Oh, without spin. Yeah.
Without
Yeah.
spin. When you turn on the magnetic field, do you find that efficiency reduced?
Oh, this is the same.
Same.
The only thing that basically can happen is sometimes we use perpendicular magnetic field and the dot shape is changed a little bit because of like Landau levels inside the quantum dot. But we can retune that and there is no problem. The field that so this one at 3 Tesla is done in parallel magnetic field, so there is no effect like this. And this one at 200 and 100 millitesla are done with a perpendicular magnetic field, but 200 millitesla is a little bit too small to have like really effect of the cyclotron orbit.